Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. John Blaxland. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Strategic and Defence Study Centre. And what I'm going to talk today about is the flag and about some defining national symbols for multicultural Australia in the Asian century. Now, some people say that we should keep this our flag forever. But in fact, flags evolve. They change quite a lot, and change happens, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And if you think about the British flag, it's actually had significant changes over the years, and you can see that in the picture here. And the flag flown at the time of the settlement of Australia in 1788 was in fact not the flag we fly today. It didn't include the cross of St Andrew for the Irish people. St Patrick, sorry, I should say, cross of St Patrick. And of course, I myself am a sixth generation Australian, actually ex-serviceman, and so I'm not presenting this as a radical person wanting to upset everybody and overturn the Constitution and radically transform Australia. I'm actually, in some respects, looking to keep things much the same. But it is time to start talking about things, particularly given that the flag we have today is essentially a symbol of subordination. And that is because the Union Jack was mandated as part of the flag design. And if we look at countries around the world that have the Union Jack, or organisations that have the Union Jack in the corner, it is very much as that of being a subordinate symbol, be that a colony, a state, a nation, a fire brigade or a yacht club. And there are plenty out there. So it's hard to know just how significant we are in light of that. And if we think about the design itself, it actually dates back to the time of the British Empire. And at the beginning of the 20th century, the British Empire was global. And if you see from the picture up here, the red dots symbolised the British Empire, and it was expansive and people felt part of it. And nowadays, of course, that's a bit of an anachronism. And if you look around the countries around the world, a lot of countries we would consider strategic cousins of Australia, they've changed their flag plenty of times as well. In fact, the United States has changed theirs about 38 times, starting with when they declared independence from Britain in 1776. There you have it, a whole range of modifications over the years. And of course the Canadians, arguably one of the closest countries to Australia, closest facsimile to Australia, has changed its flag as well. It used to have a red ensign, as you see here, and the Union Jack, and they went to the maple leaf design, as you see here. It was adopted in 1965. There was no constitutional issue or Republican debate which constrained its introduction, and surprise, surprise, the sky didn't fall. In fact, what happened was Canada had a very simple, beautiful design with its maple leaf and the two red bands. But at the provincial level, their state equivalent, they captured a lot of the symbolism that we don't have at the provincial or state level. So for instance, if you look at the Nunavut flag there, on the second row on the right-hand side, that's a symbol of a part of the Aboriginal heritage of the Canadian Aboriginals. And then if you look in the bottom row in the middle, the white and blue flag of Quebec, that captures very much the French influence of Quebec, the province of Quebec. And so every province in Canada has some kind of symbolism that speaks to the idiosyncrasies of the country. We don't have that in Australia. Our regional neighbours have changed their flags numerous occasions as well. If we look at a country like Myanmar, they've just changed. They originally had the British ensign in the corner when they were part of, when they were a British colony. They then changed to the middle one there, and then of course the one on the bottom right is the flag they just introduced a couple of years ago. Malaysia's changed theirs a number of times. Indonesia, what was formerly the Netherlands East Indies until after the Second World War, it's changed its. They've also had the Aceh Merdeka flag, the flag of independent Aceh in the northwest province of Sumatra. It's got a lot of meaning, it means a lot to the people of Aceh, and it's actually been quite controversial as well in that part of the world. Thailand, what was Siam, it's changed its flag a couple of times over the years as well. For the Philippines, obviously it's changed its flag numerous occasions as well. And South Africa as well has changed it as well, as you can see from the design here. India, once it gained independence in 1947, did away with the colonial flag with the Union Jack in the corner, and it came up with its own design as well. Now, Australia, surprisingly enough, hasn't actually had one flag for the whole time since Federation. Its designs have evolved, and we look at here initially at the states and the territories. The only ones that actually have distinctive flags are actually the territories. All of the states have flags that are essentially colonial legacies, with very much the symbol of subordination of the Union Jack still in the corner. Prior to 1901, prior to Federation, Australia had a number of flags that were in circulation. One of the most prominent ones, of course, was the idea of the Eureka flag that was used at the Eureka Stockade in 1854. But that was a symbol that attracted a fair amount of controversy and was seen in many circles as a politicised symbol, and so it hasn't gained the traction, arguably, that it possibly could have otherwise. In 1901 there was a flag competition, and it was mandated that the Union Jack would take the top left-hand corner of the flag. The rest of the flag was up to us to decide, and a couple of designs were put forward, as you see there, and the one on the right is the one that was approved by King Edward VII. Now, that design essentially stole the concept from the colonial flag of the colony of Victoria. So this isn't terribly innovative, really, when you think about it. It's essentially the colonial flag of Victoria plus another star, and take the crown off. Now, what we did have was a merchant flag, which is the flag that most people identified as being the Australian flag. My father, when he grew up, saw this flag, the red ensign, and he has on many occasions said to me, "John, I don't quite get why people say this has always been our flag. When I was a kid, it was a red one, and this is the one," he meant. Well, actually, it wasn't that one. It was the one that came out after the period of 1903 to 1909, because it was adapted. You see the 6-pointed Federation star? Well, it became a 7-pointed Federation star. And all the other ones in the Southern Cross changed from being 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 points to 5 and 7 points, as you see there. Now, China is another country that's changed its flag. Prior to 1949, it was run by Chiang Kai-shek and was in tussle with Mao Zedong over who to run the country. Mao Zedong won out in 1949 and introduced the flag we know today as the flag of China. Of course, Prime Minister Menzies, an arch-conservative, didn't like the idea of the red ensign being all that closely aligned to China, and felt that the need to move away from red. So the red ensign, which was the one that people associated with the flag of Australia, was essentially changed with the 1953 Flag Act, which made the blue ensign the primary flag, the national flag of Australia. 1953. That's not that long ago when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. And of course, I love the line from Jerry Seinfeld that the British flag on a starry night is the Australian flag. And it's kind of a quirky little comment, but it speaks to the dominance of the Union Jack on our flag, and the fact that really the symbolism of Australia is kind of light on in the flag we have today. So the point I guess I'm trying to make here is that flags are not unchangeable. Symbolism is important, but it does need updating, and people around the world happily update their symbols. And change is not always revolutionary. Canada's change didn't bring about a break from the Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth is still the Queen of Canada. The current flag we have is from a white male British dominated era, and it's a bit of an anachronism, and many are left out of that current design. And my sense is that that's a bit unreasonable. And it is, as I say, an anachronism. As you see here, this is the opening of Parliament in 1927. Most of the flags there are the Union Jack and the red ensign. Well, that's not what we see today as the flag of Australia. Yeah, that's what people back then identified as the Australian flag. If we look around the region, we see a number of countries that have the Union Jack in its corner, but it's really, in many respects, the last vestiges of empire, and I think it's time to move on. Now, the other thing is that Australians fought and died not so much under the blue ensign we know today. In fact, 102,000 Australians have died in the First and Second World Wars, essentially, and they died not under the blue ensign, but under the Union Jack you see in the slide here. So the idea that all Australians died under the one flag and we're fighting for the flag is actually a completely misconceived notion. But there is quite an emotional connection in this generation to this flag, and it has to do with the fact that it's been flying at schools now since we all grew up. So people think that that's always been the case. In fact, it's not. But it's also worth remembering that people don't fight for a flag. They fight for their family, for their country, for their ideals, and for their mates. But many are still emotionally attached to the 1953 flag. So moving away from it is actually quite tricky. And yet at the same time, it's become quite political. And as Peter Fitzsimons says, the flag is no longer a symbol that unites us, it divides us. So how did we come to be in this predicament? Well, if you have to step back into history and look at what happened, and essentially we didn't break away from Britain until mid-century. In 1931, December 1931, Britain enacted the Statute of Westminster that basically gave countries like Britain and Australia and Canada and New Zealand complete self-governing status. Australia didn't adopt it until 1942, after the fall of Singapore, when the Japanese invaded and came south, when we finally realised that it wasn't Britain that was going to be able to help us, it had to be ourselves. We had to stand on our own 2 feet. Then, of course, the Australian Citizenship Act came in 1948. Prior to that, we were all simply British subjects or aliens, if you weren't a British subject. Of course, even when I was a little kid, on my mother's passport, it said British subject, even though it said Australian passport at the top. So we took a long while getting over ourselves. And one of the things that helped was the fact that Britain's empire was shrinking. They withdrew from empire in the 1960s, essentially, and that made us sit up and take notice. At the same time, we had some changes to the constitution that recognised more fully Aboriginal people as being a legitimate part of the country, and that was a significant point in us having a better sense of who we are. Further on, Britain then joins the European community, which subsequently became the European Union. And of course we had waves of migration that led to significant change in the makeup of the community. And what happened was we then had a series of culture and identity wars in the post-British Empire era. And the question then arose, well, how do we reconcile this, arguably this dialectic of heritage and views? We had Gough Whitlam introduce God Save the Queen as the national anthem, Advance Australia Fair, to replace God Save the Queen. Malcolm Fraser initially resisted that, but then eventually succumbed, and we still have Advance Australia Fair today. The idea, the mythology of Anzac, when we think about the mythology of Anzac, initially it was very much being seen as part of the empire, plus a little bit, this distinctive egalitarian streak to Australianness that made us part of empire but distinctive within empire. And then Peter Weir came along in 1981 and made the film Gallipoli. And he then, in a significant moment in terms of Australians' consciousness, self-consciousness, identified Australians as particularly non-British, as not British, but distinct from Britain. And that then led to really a reinvigoration of the notion of Anzac. And it's been clutched on as a key national symbolic event and it's been the most prominent symbol around which for the idea of Australia to coalesce. As much as some people may not like that, it's kind of reality. Now what's happened is along the way Eddie Marbey came along and the idea of terra nullius was overturned, and it triggered a significant re-evaluation of Australian identity, something which I don't think we've kind of fully come to grips with yet. Paul Keating came along as Prime Minister and he tried to mark out this new identity, but he kind of relegated the Englishness of the Australian identity with the push, with a Celtic Irish sort of push, the anti-British sort of streak that left many unsatisfied and led arguably to the reaction that came with John Howard as Prime Minister, who denigrated the so-called black armband view of history. And so we weren't reconciled. We did search for meaning and symbolism, particularly through the repatriation of an Australian unknown soldier to the War Memorial, and that I think helped, but we're still largely left with an unreconciled sense of what it is to be an Australian. And this is why I think some change is required. Constitutional reconciliation and recognition is being pushed, and it's gaining momentum. Along with that, there's the whole idea of diversity, and we need to, my sense is we need to recognise that diversity symbolically and not just in words. Of course, modern multicultural Australia is a very diverse place, even though it is still primarily made up of descendants or migrants of the British Isles. So, how then do we reconcile rather than alienate? How do we do that with this, what I would say is an anachronistic symbol for an independent country? What do we do about that, given the fact that we are we aren't British anymore. We have British connections, we have British roots and heritage, but we're much more than that. That's only a part of what we are and who we are. Now, I think symbolism is important, and this is why I think talking about a flag is worthwhile doing. There's been a series of other flags, and they're presented here. And there was a flag competition 15 years ago, and we came up with a whole swag of designs, but none of them were really compelling. None of them spoke to people in sufficient detail and with sufficient feeling to generate enough change, enough momentum for change. Now, there's a whole swag of really not bad designs that came up, but none of them really came out as the top one that was compelling. And there's been plenty since then. There's been Facebook pages, Change the Aussie Flag. People continue to come up with flag designs. People want change, they're just not sure what. And Austrag came up with a design in 2000 that ignored British and the Aboriginal dimension to Australian identity, had limited meaningfulness and a pretty bland colour scheme, as you see here. And it really failed to stir the imagination. Similarly with the Austrag design that came up this year, but this one takes the Federation star out of the picture, which is a very important part, I would argue, of the symbolism of Australia. And then, of course, we've had the emergence of the Aboriginal flag as a designated flag of Australia, with its rich symbolism, as you see in the picture here, of Indigenous people, of the sun and of the ochre of the land. And of course, the Torres Strait Islander flag is another one that's been designated a flag of Australia in '95, capturing the land, the people, the sea, the symbolism of the headdress and of the islands themselves. So, what do we do? How do we reconcile this clumsy arrangement we have with three flags? I put to you that we should have one that speaks to all of us. And this is the design I've come up with. And essentially, we had a poll, and it indicated that 51% really loved it, another 18% liked it, but thought there were some issues with aspects of it. So 69% felt this was a good idea. Various other elements were resisting that. So there's obviously some discussion we need to have about what is our national identity, what is it all about. I would argue there are six touchstones for reconciliation, inclusiveness and respect. They are the Aboriginal flag, the Torres Strait Islander flag, the Union Jack, the green and gold of the boxing kangaroo, the Southern Cross itself and the Federation Star. And that's why I think if you look at the one I've proposed, it captures those touchstones through the recognition of the original inhabitants, the adaptation of a Federation Star with 250 dots, symbolising the Aboriginal languages and the languages of migrants who've come to Australia since 1788. So the idea of us all being together in the Federation. And you can see there the Aboriginal inspiration of the dots, the wonderful artwork, that incredibly beautiful and creative dot artwork that is so uniquely Australian Aboriginal. And this is, as I say, what I think is the pièce de résistance, if you like. The most symbolic and significant aspect of this design is the idea of us all being together, all peoples from all around the world, all migrants to Australia, recent and ancient, in the Federation together. Then there is the red, for symbolising the ochre of the land, the boomerang, the unique Australian invention, which is obviously a recurring symbol, as you can see here, from the Australian National University's own coat of arms. The idea of the white, the girt by sea, if you like, and also the link to the British institutions with the red, white and blue. So that's the institutional link, the language link, the people link, and the cultural link with Britain. And also the idea of the kind of the waves on the shoreline, which you get if you look at the symbolism from the ANU's coat of arms. So it's rich with symbolism. Then there is the green and the green and the blue, which captures some of the symbolism from the Torres Strait Islander flag, and the green and the yellow, or the green and the gold, which is sporting Australia, that modern, multicultural, independent Australian colours that we know and love from so many sporting successes. So if you look from left to right, you have the story of Australia, ancient and Aboriginal, British colonial, and then modern, independent and multicultural Australia. So the story of Australia is of everyone included in the Federation, and we're all in this together. And as I say, the idea of the Federation Star with the dots is a symbol of reconciliation. Some people like it. Journalist and author Paul Daly has made some positive remarks about it, as you can see here. And some people don't. Some people think it's too busy, there's too many colours. I don't like the white stripe, some say. Don't like the connection with the Union Jack. I don't like the Federation star. I don't like the boomerang. I don't like the dots. I don't like the green and gold Southern Cross. Too hard for kids to draw, which is arguable. How many kids can draw the current one, I would ask. And green doesn't work next to blue, some people say. Well, it's actually very, very hard to please everybody, surprisingly enough. So you can't please everyone, but I think we do need to choose a design or be stuck with what I see as an anachronistic symbol that doesn't speak to modern day Australia. So are there alternatives? Well, as Groucho Marx famously said, these are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. So what I've got here is a couple of alternative models that just modify things slightly. And there's a couple of experimental concepts as I was coming up with this design. You can see a couple more there. That's my personal preference because it captures those 6 touchstones I talked about. But there are others. If you take away the green and the gold from the Southern Cross, you get several of the touchstones, but you don't deal with the Torres Strait Islander touchstone or the green and gold, the sporting colours. Similarly, without the white band, you touch on a lot of them, but you don't touch on the symbolism of the Union Jack. If you do that without the white band and then with the white Southern Cross, there's a couple that you miss out as well. The green and gold, the Torres Strait Islander and the Union Jack don't get touched on. And you can see there, this one, if you change the colour of the Federation Star to yellow, you take away from the symbolism of the yellow from the Aboriginal flag. Then if you change it to take away the yellow entirely and make all of those yellow bits white, then this is what you get. But once again, you don't get the full richness of the symbolism. And you know, this is the thing I don't get to decide. This is something for Australians to decide. But here's another option without the green. So you don't get the green and gold and you don't get the blue and green connection. But I do think it's time for an inclusive flag symbolising reconciliation. Here at the ANU, we think about these things, we reflect, we try to add meaning to Australian society, try to add meaning to our lives, we reflect, we research, we learn, we explore. So what do you think? What do you think is the way forward? Now, the floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. The choice is yours. We as Australians get to decide. It's a democracy. It's not up to me. I've just put an idea out there and it's something that's been fostered here at the university, this creative reflection on our history, on our culture, on our roots, on who we are, on the symbolism and the significance of symbolism. The choice is yours. But there are a couple of options there. There's a Facebook page, as you can see in the slide, Reconciliation Flag for Australia it's called. You can have a look at it and reflect and share. But it is time, I would argue, for an inclusive flag that symbolises reconciliation.